Is green once again. We'll take a look at some things you may want to consider with your apple trees before that happens.
On this tree, the first thing I notice is that we got a double top. We don't want that. Take out the weaker one.
That's all tonight, so sit back and put your feet up. It's Monday night and time for discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forest thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak. Surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields. Call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill.
Inch and a half. And the last tool that I use is a chainsaw. This is for limbs that are too large for the pneumatic pruner. I don't have to use it too often. What I want to do is start with a different age trees and go through the progression and also look at different varieties. Varieties have different growth habits and they require different techniques. Most people think they're farming the soil, but when you're growing apple trees, you're really farming the sun. The sun exposure to all parts of the tree are very important. So yes, the soil is important, but everything starts with the sunlight. When they're buying trees from me, they always ask, well, how tall is it? As if the height is the main point on purchasing a tree. It really isn't. It's more about distribution of branches. I just soon have a young tree, a small tree, then I can control how the branches form. This tree probably, when it came from the nursery, is probably about this tall. And in order to form the bottom branches, I want the bottom branches to grow out. In order to do that, I have to shorten the top. If you shorten the top, that forces side branches to grow. The other critical thing is the crotch angle. I like a branch to come out as flat as possible. Anywhere from 90 to 60 is acceptable. If you get a narrow crotch, that's a weak spot. If you get fruit on there and it bends over, there's a good chance that that branch is going to break off right at the crotch. What I'm going to do is cut this off, and this becomes my main stem. You only want one stem on a dwarf tree. So I cut that off, and I cut it pretty close. It's very important with a young tree to do a minimum amount of pruning. Every time you prune, it encourages vegetative growth. So if you're doing too much pruning, you're going to delay fruiting. On a dwarf tree, you should expect fruit 2 years after you plant the tree. Now, some varieties like Honeycrisp, they throw out a lot of fruit buds. Often you can get fruit the first year. You want good distribution of branches. This one has pretty good distribution. One coming here, 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 here. I would like to have one coming out here, but I don't have it. We have to live with that. The other thing you want to watch for is looking ahead, the amount of shading. Now I've got a branch growing here and one going directly underneath it. I'm going to cut this one off. It's not going to be needed. And that's all I'm going to do on this tree right here. You can kind of control the crotch angle yourself. What I use are ordinary clothespins. When the branch is about 4 inches long, what I'll do, put the clothespin on like that, and that holds the branch at a more desirable angle. And I take them off usually about August. The plastic pins, the sun degrades them and they'll bust up on you. This is an interesting case. Here's the main stem. I cut it back last year. We got a double leader going up, which is a no-no, and we got one strong branch from last year. Well, this I want as my leader, not one of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to favor this one, even though it's coming out at kind of an angle. That'll straighten up as the tree grows. So we cut that off. This I don't want because I want to get height on this leader So this is going to take energy away from that and will compete with that leader. So I'm taking this one off. Now this tree is going into its 4th year. I was not happy with the amount of growth I was getting. So last year I pumped the nitrogen into it, and I got some real good growth, as you can see. You know, we've got 18 inches of growth there and 20 inches of growth here. The downside of that is if you get too much vegetative growth, you're not going to get the fruit buds. So I don't see many fruit buds on this tree, but that's all right. I got the growth that I want. This year I won't put any nitrogen on. And so the next year then I should have a lot of fruit buds. When a tree gets to be 3-4 years old, that's when you start doing heavier pruning, because you got to start selecting permanent branches. Now this one here is totally useless. First of all, it's going to grow into the next tree. Secondly, it's being shaded by the other branches, so this one comes off. The other thing you want to do is any branches that are growing inward or straight up, we take off. Like that. This one here is no good. That little one there is no good. Over on this side, we've got a weak branch growing under a strong one. I like this crotch angle. This one's coming off. This one's growing upright. That's got to come off. I'm going to leave that on because that looks like a fruit bud. I'd like to see an apple there. On this tree, the first thing I notice is that we got a double top. We don't want that. Take out the weaker one. And this one is growing too upright. That comes off. Now, when I make a cut, there's 2 types of cuts. One is a flush cut, and one is a stub cut. Now, if you look at this right here, I cut that branch off last year to a stub cut. The reason I did that is I want regrowth, which is what I got there. I've got a 2-inch stub there. When you do that, you force regrowth. Real close to where it attaches to the stem is like a collar. That's where the growth hormones are on a branch. So if you leave that collar intact, many times you'll get a regrowth. If you don't want the branch to come back, you cut as close to that stem as you can. My main objective here in managing the style of the tree is to have a lower tier of branches all the way around, nice distribution. Those are my permanent branches. Everything above that is what we call renewal branches. We want the sunlight to penetrate down on these lower branches. That's where it's easiest to pick. So I took this branch out because it was shading the lower branches. And I made a stub cut, meaning that's going to shoot another branch out, and I'll let that branch fruit for 2-3 years. I'll cut it back again. The process repeats itself. So you always want to think in terms of sunlight. In here is a branch that's no longer useful. When the tree was young, I probably had some good fruit off of it. Here's another one. I don't want regrowth. That comes off. Here on this branch coming out, I do want regrowth. So I leave a stub. Here's one that's going to be unproductive because it's underneath this one. That comes off. This one comes off. Another rule of thumb is that you take off 2 or 3 branches a year. And if you do that consistently, you end up with a minimum amount of pruning per tree. And if you take off more than that, you're going to get a lot of vegetative growth. Every time you make a cut, it's going to want to grow back, as you can see right there. Make too many cuts, you're going to get a flush of green growth. So you can see now I've got a nice flat surface for the sun to penetrate, taking the top shading off, and that tree is good to grow. And I got a lot of fruit buds on here. These are Cortland trees, actually called red court. I got four different kind of Cortlands, and they're a very difficult tree to prune for two reasons. Number one, they're very vigorous. Secondly, they are tip bearers, meaning that apples grow on the end of the branch, and what happens is that the branches, because of that, the young branches bend down. So I have to have my lower branches up, a good 3 feet off the ground. And a couple of years ago, I decided they're just too high for me. I got to bring the height down. So I've been working on that, and it's been a battle because the tree, the more cuts I make, the more regrowth I get, the bushier the tree gets, throwing shade down below. This one is too big. I'm going to leave a stub cut. This one's getting too big. Take this upright growing branch. I'm going to take this one off, stub cut, because I got too much shade. Got a downward growing branch here. So now you can see I've got some good exposure to the bottom branches. I left a stub cut here probably 2-3 years ago, and I shouldn't have. So I'm going to cut that flush. I don't want growth there. I want sunlight down here where I can pick the apple. Same with this. A branch here that's outlived its usefulness, it now gets too much shade, coming off with a flush cut. Now this is what happens when you get tip-bearing trees. They pull the branch down, and the following year you don't get much sunlight. So I'm going to cut this back to this. Same with this one. This one is getting too much shade from the other tree. This one's coming off. So basically I have 2 branches coming out from the stem on this side, 2 on that side, base of the tree. Those will be permanent branches. That's about it for this side of the tree. Now this looks like a mess. In a certain sense it is. This is a Jonomac. It's not on the Bud 9. It's on what's called an M26, which is a more aggressive rootstock. They kind of got out of hand a couple of years ago, and ever since I've been trying to tame it down, bring the height down. You can see what happens. When you do too much cutting in 1 year, you're going to get a lot of regrowth. Get rid of as much upright growth as you want. Cut that off. All this stuff growing in here is no good. See, I'm cutting those close to the stem, hoping it doesn't grow back. Now up at the top, I've got too much going on. I'm going to take out this upper one growing straight up. Actually, I'm going to take this one off. We're going to prune this one. It doesn't need a lot. You can see there's quite a bit of open space here where the bottom part of the tree is getting sunshine. However, because of a cut I made here 2 years ago, we got an upward growth. We also have a crotch here, which is no good. You want to cut out all crotches. This I'm going to cut to a side branch. And here, I could take this off, but it's not shading that much. So what I'm going to do is just cut one leg off, and I'll cut the upright one off. Growing upright. Growing upright. This row is Honeycrisp. I always order Honeycrisp on Bud 9. The year after I planted them, they started growing pretty fast. I said, man, this is pretty good. But they kept on growing and growing and growing. About year 5, trees were up about 12 feet. I said, I know these aren't Bud 9. I've been fighting to control the trees where I get maximum sunlight. And after about 4 or 5 years, I'm finally getting to that point. It cut the tops back and did a lot of trimming above the base layer. And if you look down the row, I think it's evident. You see flat growth all the way down with the central leader going up. That's just the way I want it. So every part of the tree is getting full sun exposure. This tree is a yellow transparent, and what's different, besides the variety, is that it's on a semi-dwarf rootstock. I prefer the dwarf rootstocks because trees don't get too big and they're easier to manage, easier to pick the fruit. And I would guess that the most people watching out there have either semi-dwarf or standard. So you want to prune these differently than you would a dwarf. A dwarf, we want a single stem growing up with bottom side branches and renewal top. You have two choices. You can either grow that single top and shape it like an umbrella, think a lot of the old orchards from years ago, or you can do a vase type style, which is what I use here. Now, if you look at right here, this is the main stem. Probably 3-4 years ago, I cut that main stem off because I didn't want it to get too tall. See, I cut it off at a side branch. Now this branch right here is shading this branch and shading that branch. There's just too much going on. So what I'm going to do is cut it off right here. Take that center stem out. Now you can see how that has opened up the tree so that sunlight penetrates all portions of the tree. A lot of people ask me, do you have to treat these wounds? The answer is no, and it'll seal over by itself. If you put black tar on there or whatever, that's probably the worst thing you can do because the black absorbs the heat, absorbs the sun, especially in the wintertime, and gets the juices flowing, and you don't want that. These branches that are growing to the middle, again, they want to grow to the sunlight. In this case, I don't want them to. So I take these inner ones out, cutting them flush because I don't want them to grow back. I think that'll be it for this tree. Nice and open now. That's it for the pruning portion. Key points. Number one, you got to prune your trees every year. Do it during the dormant season and decide on before you start, you got to decide on a style of how you're going to grow that tree. Where do you want the fruit? Do you want it down here on the bottom? Do you want an umbrella type tree? And you have to prune accordingly. And again, the number one rule for pruning is that every part of the tree should have sunlight.
Well, that's it for tonight. If you'd like to keep tabs on what's coming up on Discovering or see where we've been, go to 906outdoors.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week right here on Discovering. Welcome to Discovering. Spring has sprung, and it won't be long till everything is green once again. We'll take a look at some things you may want to consider with your apple trees before that happens.
On this tree, the first thing I notice is that we got a double top. We don't want that. Take out the weaker one.
That's all tonight, so sit back and put your feet up. It's Monday night and time for Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forest thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak. Surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has